So this first breakout session in this room is about promoting remembrance and fighting distortion and denial, whether it's in real life or online. And we're going to have contributions from our distinguished panel of guests. And after, hopefully, at the end of this session, we'll have time for a few more interventions, as well as some perhaps questions. We are also streaming this session online for our participants, those who are watching on their computers. The heads of delegation will each have 3 to 4 minutes for prepared statements. And this breakout session, as I mentioned, will focus specifically on this topic. And I'm really, really hoping that toward the end of this hour, we will have time for questions, both from our participants and contributors online, and perhaps also from people who are joining us in this room. We will also have some short films that we'll be featuring, and they will be displayed on the screen here behind me. So we have 9 contributors for this breakout session. Dr. Robert Williams of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum will be first, and you stay seated, and everyone else will be able to hear you through their headphone.
So, thank you, Hala. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. I don't quite trust the technology, but I'll begin with a very general statement, and that is the Holocaust is not just a tale from the past. It's not something far away from long ago, something that doesn't impact our day-to-day lives. This is because the Holocaust happened in a world similar to our own. The perpetrators and victims were like us, members of an ordered, modern society, and they lived in a time of democratic upheavals when international norms and institutions were being continually called into question, and when societies sought refuge in false myths of communal narcissism rather than tackling the challenges of the day. And it is because of the Holocaust that after 1945, we had to rebuild our international system and to establish new human rights norms. From the Genocide and Refugee Conventions of the UN, to the treatment of civilians in military conflict, to the fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, the shadow of the Holocaust looms large. And just look in some of our classrooms, our popular cultures, and our museums. It is clear that the Holocaust influences how we see ourselves today. And I wish this was sufficient, but the echoes of the past boom loudly. Some of those challenges we hoped to overcome in 1945 have only grown stronger. Today, even the truth of the Holocaust is under assault. And if we allow the Holocaust to be denied or twisted, what hope is there for those developments that followed in its wake? Those who deny the Holocaust claim it never happened. They only have one goal: to normalize anti-Semitism. This makes Holocaust denial a real and existing threat. The related phenomenon of Holocaust distortion is more common and, if anything, more insidious. You see, distortion excuses, minimizes, or otherwise misrepresents the Holocaust and its contemporary relevance. This makes it an infinitely adaptable form of disinformation that affects all of our societies. Why someone distorts is less important than the consequences. Because morally, Holocaust distortion is an insult to the memories of victims and survivors, but practically, it acts as a gateway drug, if you will, to conspiracy theory, outright Holocaust denial, and dangerous forms of anti-Semitism. And this takes many forms, well beyond those shameful comparisons made by anti-vaxxers to pandemic responses. Politically motivated distortion is sadly common. Consider the all too many attempts to deny communal or national complicity in Holocaust-related crimes. These false claims, in turn, breed new false narratives that, in time, lead to domestic and international disharmony. And these memory wars are playing out in shocking ways, as shown by the growing number of attempts in almost every one of our countries to rehabilitate the reputations of people complicit in the crimes of the Holocaust. So what do? We cannot stay silent. We must work together. Our policymakers, our leaders, and our youth must understand the Holocaust and why it matters today. And there are tools available to us. These include the multilingual resources of my home institution, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as those of other Holocaust organizations. Enhanced cooperation between our governments and our Holocaust-facing institutions will lead to meaningful knowledge on the subject, and perhaps more important, stronger checks against distortion and denial in both the online and real world. There are also promising international developments, including recent steps taken by the Council of Europe and the European Commission to fight anti-Semitism in all of its forms. And significantly, at the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, we recently produced detailed guidelines on Holocaust distortion so that policymakers can not only recognize this problem, but respond more effectively to it. And that brings me to my final point. Political responsibility is key. Governments need to begin leading by example and not allow the Holocaust or its themes to become a cudgel that one opponent uses against another. We have to face these challenges. They are complex, but we have to act now before the last of the survivors die, because it is our responsibility to them to create a better world instead of one with a painfully uncertain future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. The Minister of State for Europe, the German Minister of State for Europe, Michael Roth. And by the way, I just wanted to also mention that time and again we've heard that the one of the major battlefields is online, and for all of you here, if we can also stress the importance of combating Holocaust denial and distortion and all forms of anti-Semitism and racism online, that would also be very helpful. Thank you so much. The floor is yours, Mr. Roth.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you so much. 21 years after the Stockholm Declaration, we have to ask ourselves, what is the current situation? And what I note, unfortunately, is that little has improved and a lot has deteriorated. And for me, as a representative of the country from which the Holocaust started, where it began, and where we have particular responsibility for the Holocaust, it is something that we are deeply ashamed of. I think the numbers speak for themselves. There have been surveys in the European Union, representative surveys. 80% of Jews in Europe no longer feel safe. 38% have already given some thought to the possibility of leaving the European Union because they no longer feel safe. Correction, 38%. And this is not only because of threats, an increasing number of threats online, there's also a great increase in offline threats. And this is not just abstract phenomena, it's something very tangible. It is the reality. In my own country, just to give you one example, recently in Hanau, we had a racist attack. 9 people fell victim to this attack. 2 years ago, we had a terrible attack on Yom Kippur in Halle, on the synagogue, an attack on the synagogue. And again, people were victims of that attack. And if you look around Europe, you'll see also that there's an increase in anti-Gypsyism. I don't see any improvement there. In some areas, you'll see posters being put up on walls with racist sentiments being expressed. And this is happening right now as we speak. And what's particularly alarming is the relativization of the Holocaust and the way in which it is spoken about, as if it were something harmless. We've had, in Germany, we've seen terrible, terrible pictures. I mean, in my own country, people working for the healthcare service have been called Mengele doctors because they spoke in favor of a vaccination campaign. They were compared to Mengele doctors. In my capital city, in Berlin, people took to the streets, they put on a yellow star, a David star, saying non-vaccinated on this yellow star. So there's a real blurring between what is legal and what is unlawful, what is illegal. There's a blurring of lines, and that is so very dangerous. Little by little, what this means is that the Holocaust is represented as something normal, not something unique, incomparable, a human rights violation like no other, no longer presented as such. And that is why we need to get better at this. We need to make more of an effort. We need to deploy more of an effort in order to look at facts, in order to remember the Holocaust based on facts. We need to also make sure that we remember and promote the sites where the Holocaust can be remembered. We need to keep the memory alive. We need to do more for that. We need to also foster Jewish life better than before. We need to do more in order to make sure that Jews, but also other minorities in our countries, feel at home and welcome in our countries. That is a societal responsibility. You know, we've tried to make our own small contribution, setting up a task force on Holocaust distortion, and this was under the presidency of the IHRA, and I would be really, really happy if that effort could be rolled out across Europe and internationally. It would be really good if we could take this further. Anti-Semitism, the Holocaust cannot be minimized. Not in my own country, nowhere in the world. We must put an end to this.
For that. The President of Lithuania, Gitanas Nausėda, thank you for also being here. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to Swedish government, today we have a valuable opportunity to discuss Holocaust remembrance and the ways of combating all forms of anti-Semitism. The Holocaust must never be forgotten. The Holocaust is unique. The Lithuanian people remember the great tragedy that for us started 80 years ago. Every September, on National Holocaust Remembrance Day, we pay respect to Lithuanian Jews, our fellow citizens who lost their lives at many mass killing sites. This tragedy has touched almost every Lithuanian city and town. There were the towns with where the Jewish people were in the majority, 50–60% of them. There were the cities with many cities in Lithuania with the part of the people, 20–30% of Jewish people. So, in other words, an entire layer of our society has been erased by Nazis and their collaborators. The Shoah has left a void which sadly can never be filled. Those people were the musicians, artists, scientists, doctors. They could contribute to the progress of my country so much, but this chance was brutally stolen from them, was brutally stolen from Lithuania. So what we have to do, first of all, we must ensure that next generations remember and reflect on what has happened. There is no other way to ensure that the horrors of the past never happen again. The pledges we are making today should translate into concrete actions targeting at younger generation as well as wider society. One of the best instruments we have is, of course, education. The Lithuanian school curricula will be updated so that they reflect recommendations on teaching and learning about the Holocaust. 2 new museums are developed with the aim to preserve the heritage of Litvaks, as well as the memory of Holocaust. They will become a part of the Vilna Gaon Museum of Lithuanian Jewish people history. Holocaust memorial places across Lithuania are being renovated each year. I am proud to note that local communities, students and their teachers are actively involved in these activities, seeking to preserve Holocaust remembrance. We must also ensure academic freedom and develop strong international cooperation. Lithuania's existing research institutions are ready to play an important role in exploration of the Holocaust, the Roma genocide, and other various forms of persecution of different groups. In our turbulent times, open dialogue based on facts is absolutely crucial. What we cannot tolerate is anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and attempts to distort historic reality that take new forms in the digital space. More than ever before, the rise of populism, intolerance, and radicalism require concerted international efforts. So, and finally, I welcome the efforts of European Union to address these important issues. In particular, the first ever European Union strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. Lithuania is ready to contribute.
Thank you so much. President Klaus Johannes of Romania, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Presidents, Prime Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to participate at the Malmö Forum. Today, we take stock of our actions and acknowledge the lessons learned over the past decades. As we face increasing and more complex challenges, it is the right time to strengthen our commitment to uphold Holocaust education, research, and remembrance, as well as to prevent and combat anti-Semitism. The attempts to deny or distort the Holocaust are getting more dangerous and more subtle. The concrete methods to do this are diverse, blurring the responsibility of participants to the Holocaust and of their collaborators, trivializing the sufferings of the Holocaust, and dehumanizing the victims of the Holocaust. Remembrance is the most important element. It is the prerequisite for our current efforts to counter Holocaust distortion. This is why it is placed so high as our priority. We need new and innovative ways to disseminate the testimonies of survivors and the adequate resources during this process, which is one of the most efficient ways to contribute to Holocaust education and prevention. Today at this forum, it is my honor to announce a series of pledges to which Romania is firmly committed. We are currently engaging in a thorough process of reviewing Holocaust education programs for the young generation. In correlation, we are also updating the training programs for professors, teachers, and instructors who are active in the field of Holocaust. Efforts are also underway to operationalize the National Museum of Jewish History and of the Holocaust in Romania. The responsible authorities have recently selected the consortium which will elaborate the concept of its permanent exhibitions. The consortium includes companies that have contributed to setting up some of the most prestigious Holocaust memorials and museums worldwide. And I'm sure that with their support, the museum in Bucharest will be an international reference, and it will contribute to preserving the truth and fighting Holocaust distortion. Another important pledge taken to establish a national annual award for Romanian and international personalities that contribute to Holocaust education, research, and remembrance, as well as to preventing and combating anti-Semitism. Romania has also recently adopted, in May 2021, its first national strategy for preventing and combating anti-Semitism, xenophobia, radicalization, and hate speech, and an associated action plan. The action plan includes 36 concrete projects structured along the three main pillars of the strategy. First, protection of vulnerable groups. Second, increasing the societal resilience through educational and cultural programs, including fostering Jewish life. And third, enhancing international cooperation. The Romanian strategy will be complemented by the first EU strategy for combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life, which was very recently adopted. In addition, since January 2021, a special representative of the Romanian government for promoting the policies of memory, for fighting anti-Semitism and xenophobia was appointed. All these measures will provide even more substance to Romania's already firm commitment towards dealing with the past and recognizing the tragedy of the Holocaust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Iohannis. And now for a short pledge film from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Take a look at the screen.
Želim na ovom mjestu potvrditi posvećenost Bosne i Hercegovine očuvanju sjećanja i istine o Holokaustu. U to ime inicirat ću istraživački projekat Memorijalnog centra u Srebrenici koji bi bio realiziran u saradnji sa jevrejskom zajednicom u Bosni i Hercegovini i ustanovama posvećenim izučavanju Holokausta, a s ciljem očuvanja sjećanja na Holokaust. Pozdravljam činjenicu da su vlasti kantona Sarajevo u saradnji sa jevrejskom zajednicom u Bosni i Hercegovini i Vijećem Europe organizirali da se u 3 posljednja mjeseca ove godine u 3 srednje i 3 osnovne škole održi nastava o Holokaustu.
Our next speaker is the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis.
There is simultaneous translation. Ladies and gentlemen, there is simultaneous translation. Please, yes, please use your headgear. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this forum and, in particular, Mr. Prime Minister Stefan Löfven for the kind invitation to participate in this forum. Our state is going to decisively respond to any manifestation of anti-Semitism, xenophobia, intolerance, and to disallow any hate crimes. Well, Ukraine has paid a too awful price during the Holocaust and the World War II. Remembrance of Nazi terror victims has become part of the historic consciousness of Ukrainians. The majority of the Holocaust victims in Ukraine were executed during the mass shootings in Babin Yar ravine, which has become a sad symbol of the genocide of the Jews of Ukraine. Babin Yar is one of the deepest unhealed wounds in the consciousness of Ukrainians, Jews, Roma, a sacred place of awakening of the collective historic memories, one of the most heartbreaking recollection of Holocaust. We, with a deep respect, remember Ukrainians who, risking their own lives and the lives of the members of their families, were rescuing Jews from the Nazi terror despite of the fatal risk they were facing. And I'm proud of more than 2,500 of my compatriots who were awarded an honorable title of the Riotous Gentile of the World by the Shoah and the Heroism of the Jewish People Complex Yad Vashem in Israel. In 2021, we officially established the 14th of May as a memory day of the Ukrainians who were saving the Jews during the World War II. The tragedy of Holocaust is an eternal reminder of the necessity to take joint, decisive efforts to prevent a regeneration of totalitarian ideologies, manifestation of intolerance on the grounds of ethnicity. And exactly because of this, providing truthful information about Holocaust in our educational institutions has become one of the most relevant issues. Back in the 90s of the 20th century, Ukraine, following the recommendations of the Council of Europe, was the first country in the post-Soviet space to introduce the topic of Holocaust as a mandatory item on the curriculum of all the Ukrainian schools in the land. The efficiency of the educational efforts of the state and organizations of the civil society was confirmed by the results of the Pew Research Center, a poll which defines Ukraine as a country with the lowest indicators of the anti-Semitic moods in the Eastern Europe. Quite recently, on the 22nd of September, Verkhovna Rada, the parliament of Ukraine, has passed a bill on prevention and counteraction of antisemitism, which at the legislative level defines a definition of antisemitism, and it is directed at prevention and counteracting thereof in Ukraine. The memory of the Holocaust tragedy is a part of the national memory of the Ukrainian people. Paying tribute to the victims of the mass massacre and remembering those who were saving their lives, we can create this society based on the feelings of tolerance, interethnic and interfaith common ground, where human rights make its basis irrespective of the origin, social or other status of its citizens. Let us be responsible for the memory of the past. Eternal memory for innocent victims of all the victims of Holocaust. Ukraine remembers. Thank you.
Minister of Estonia now, Kaja Kallas. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Estonians have a saying, who does not remember the past lives without the future. The simple saying can be said in a more sophisticated way, for example, by quoting Elie Wiesel, to remember means to lend an ethical dimension to all endeavors and aspirations. Today's gathering attests to this wisdom. We have a responsibility to remember. To remember also means to stand against new dangers. What also matters is how we speak to each other, how we treat each other, and what are the policy choices we make on daily basis. Timothy Snyder, a history professor at the Yale University, has illustrated the latter at the example of the current health crisis, and I quote, "What matters is whether we regard our disease as particular or as a universal challenge. The Second World War is very instructive here. In the 1920s and the 1930s, Nazis, fascists, and others tended to regard disease as something which came from the other. The pandemic of that time, typhus, tuberculosis, influenza, and others, were blamed by the Nazis on the Jews in particular. This became a reason to gather Jews up in ghettos. This became a reason to watch Jews sicken in ghettos, and finally an argument for killing them all. In other words, the greatest of crimes that we recall in the context of Second World War has direct connections to the history of pandemic. This should remind us that how we behave now, how we behave during other pandemics, has implications for our own future." End of quote. The sudden tragic turns of history should make us vigilant and alert to every early warning sign. It is unacceptable to have even the tiniest flirtations with dangerous ideologies. Attacks on any person's dignity, direct or indirect, should have no place in our daily lives. This is why this spring my government approved the policy for combating anti-Semitism. Estonian people suffered gravely throughout and through the atrocities of the totalitarian regimes. My mother was 6 months old when she was deported to Siberia, together with my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and my grandfather was sent to prison camp. We share a special understanding and feeling of deep solidarity with all the victims. We are conscious of the responsibility that new generations must be raised with awareness of the past so that they can stand against dangerous trends in the future. In Estonia, we have marked many of the murder sites and former camps. In the coming months, we intend to do even more. These sites of memory and open-air exhibitions are part of the curriculum and can be used even more actively in teaching and learning about the Holocaust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Kallas. The floor now goes to the Minister of National Unity and Civic Engagement for Rwanda, Jean Damascene Bizimana. Please.
Merci, Excellence.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start
by bringing you greetings from Paul Kagame, the President of Rwanda, and I'm delighted to be representing him at this forum. The memory of the Holocaust is a historical necessity. It's something that humanity must always remember in order to be mindful of humanity's cruelty. We need to ensure that generations are aware of the dangers of Holocaust denial. My country, Rwanda, is very aware of the importance of the memory of the Holocaust because in 1994 it experienced the first genocide on the African continent. This was a genocide against the Tutsi minority in 1994, and the Council of Security and the courts in Rwanda have recognized that. In 1994 in Rwanda, the genocide of the Tutsis happened in a context in which, since the perpetration of the Holocaust, the UN had established the Charter to prevent all future genocides. But there was a failure by the international community to prevent genocide. Rwanda has not rested on its laurels. Since the end of the genocide in 1994, Rwanda has created memorial sites to demonstrate the national engagement and commitment to genocide memorial. At these sites, the Holocaust is represented, just as the Tutsi genocide is represented. In school curricula, Rwandese learn the history of the Holocaust. In terms of research, Rwanda supports exchange programs with historical institutes of the Holocaust and sends Rwandese to visit Holocaust museums around the world. There are also exchanges of students and teachers and between partner Rwandese and Jewish organizations fighting against genocide in the world. In terms of criminal law, the Rwandese nation has made the genocide a crime and has also made Holocaust denial a crime. This means that anyone who is accused of denying the reality of the Holocaust has to go before the courts. Rwanda believes that if all states were to criminalize the denial of all genocides, this would be a welcome step forward, and that's my request to the forum today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bizimana of Rwanda. We have two pledge films now to show you, one from Turkey and the other from Australia, and they will be shown one after the other on the screen.
We'll always remember Holocaust, educate our people on the issue, fight against anti-Semitism in social media and in all spheres of life. To this end, we'll use the We Remember website. We'll set up the Institute on Genocide Studies at the Istanbul University. We will facilitate public access to material on addressing anti-Semitism. We'll promote academic and civil society initiatives and organize activities to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of racism.
I want to acknowledge Australia's Indigenous peoples and pay my respects to their elders, past and present and emerging. My government pledges to embrace the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Australia does so as a people and as a nation. Anti-Semitism has no place in Australia. It has no place anywhere in the world. And we must work together resolutely and as a global community to reject any word or any act that supports anti-Semitism towards individuals, towards communities or religious facilities. Australia has been blessed for generations by the presence of the children of Israel. It is a gift that Australia is choosing to honour through the establishment and upgrading of Holocaust museums all around our country. Their work is to present this memory, to keep it alive, to pass it from one generation to the next so we will never forget.
All right, and we're hearing a lot of pledges, and we heard a lot of pledges there from the heads of delegations of the countries who've spoken so far. And of course, part of this forum, a big part of it, is to put into action some of the pledges. But before we wrap up the series of pledges, we still have two speakers. The head of delegation for Latvia, President Igors Levits, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Particularly, I would like to thank Prime Minister Levin for the organizing of this very important event. I would like to remember first that Latvia, before the Second World War, was one of the few countries in Europe which accepted Jewish refugees. Jewish refugees, in particularly from Germany, from Austria, from Poland, which was already occupied. Unfortunately, 1 year after that, Latvia itself was occupied by Soviet Union, and many of the refugees, Jewish refugees, which fled to Latvia, together with a big part of Latvian Jews, were deported to Siberia. And then, after 1 year again, German Nazi occupied Latvia, and then, of course, 70,000 of Latvian citizens were killed by German Nazi occupants. Therefore, Holocaust is a very deep and important part of our history and our social memory. I would say that today the remembrance of Holocaust is very present. We have a Jewish museum. We have also Janis Lipke Museum, which honors the citizens who saved Jews during the Holocaust, risking their lives. We have now also a vibrant, small, but vibrant Jewish community with Jewish schools. And we have many memorial places in Latvia where Jews were killed, and these memorial places are renovated. So, but what is more important, I think, that we have introduced also teaching of Holocaust in our school curricula, because it is absolutely necessary that the young generation first knows about the Holocaust. And second, they should, in addition, understood why it is necessary to have this knowledge in order to be a democrat today, 2021. And we are trying through teaching of Holocaust, but also the history at all, to give the younger generation this knowledge. Let me turn to one specific point, and some of you already mentioned that. Social networks. Social networks is now, I would say, the most relevant basis for anti-Semitism. There is, of course, a close link between remembrance of Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And denial of Holocaust happens also in social networks. But I would say more dangerous is the banalization, the relativation of Holocaust, because I think one of you said that it is a part of normalization of anti-Semitism and normalization of Holocaust. And this is that what can destroy our democracy, can disturb and also destroy our democracy. Latvia, as a target of hybrid war actions, is very sensitive to rewriting history, especially rewriting of history of the Second World War. And we are very active also on UN level to combat disinformation. On European Union level, we are very active in this area. I think we should concentrate also to these new threats of democracy, which are caused by social media and anti-Semitism spread by social media. Latvia is one of the most contributors to combat anti-Semitism in this way. Thank you.
President Levits, thank you very much. The head of delegation for the United Kingdom, Lord Pickles.
It's a great honour to be following such a distinguished panel. On January 2025, a new museum will open up in London, right next to Parliament. It will be a memorial to the Holocaust and a learning centre. But buildings in themselves don't make change. It's what we put in them. And we'll be looking to tackle two things in particular. First, as Rob talked about, Holocaust distortion. Those that look at the numbers, suggest slightly different things, talk about the effect of famine, look for moral equivocation, look in terms of trying to compare it to other events, which makes it easier for anti-vaxxers to compare themselves to the victims of the Holocaust. But there's a second thing that's going on, which we haven't talked about so far, which I'm detecting not just in the United Kingdom but elsewhere, is a simple age of indifference. That people know all about the Holocaust, they understand the numbers, but they don't really care. It's starting to move into history. To what happened in the Soviet camps before and after the Second World War. And to deal with this, we have to return to the individuals. We don't, Stalin said clearly that a single death was a tragedy. A million deaths was just the statistics. We must never treat the victims of the Holocaust as statistics. We must always look for the individuals to show that it was not inevitable. People weren't born, got educated, and then were always going to die in the Holocaust. That these people had aspirations, they had hopes, and they had a future. And we need to do that not just for the victims, but we also have to do it for the perpetrators. Because everybody can imagine themselves perhaps as a victim of the Holocaust, but few people are prepared to understand that it's within all of us to be perpetrators of the Holocaust. And we need to understand that ordinary people did extraordinarily unpleasant things. And we will be wanting also to cooperate right across the piece. We're wanting to work with all colleagues here to ensure that as the number of the final victims of the Holocaust, the survivors go, that we get a chance together to frame that narrative. We get an opportunity to ensure that the truth is paramount.
Thank you, Lord Pickles. This has been such an enriching discussion because we're going beyond the idea that anti-Semitism is a problem, and we're coming up, hopefully here, with actionable pledges going forward. We have 5 minutes left in this session, and so therefore that gives us time for the Ambassador of Turkey, Emre Yant, and followed by the Ambassador of Belgium, Jean de Boet, right after. If you could keep it to less than 2 minutes, that would be great. We need to bring you a mic.
Thank you. While thanking Sweden for this great initiative, I would like to make a short intervention on how Turkey historically stands vis-à-vis Holocaust, promotes remembrance and fights against distortion. Just some highlights. Turkey was neither the victim nor the perpetrator or collaborator of Holocaust. From the Ottoman times, Turkey has been a safe haven for Jews. The new Turkish Republic thus welcomed European Jewish scientists fleeing the Holocaust who made valuable contributions to Turkish universities. We had several Raoul Wallenbergs in Turkey, courageous Turkish diplomats like Selahattin Ülkümen, the Consul General of Turkey, saved numerous Jews from Holocaust in 1944. The Turkish We Remember website is an instrument to make sure that we never forget Holocaust. We will establish the Institute on Genocide Studies at the University of Istanbul. And last but not least, we provided additional financial assistance to International Fund of Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. Thank you very much.
Ambassador. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Ambassador de Boot, if you could come back with the microphone for the ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belgium, Sophie Wilmès, is unable to join us today, and she has asked me to share with you her prepared intervention. On the 19th of April 1943, 3 young men set out on their bikes from Brussels to a small village along the railroad track. And in a daring attack with makeshift tools, they stopped the train, leaving the transit camp d'Orsay-Caserne towards Auschwitz-Birkenau, with 1,638 prisoners almost exclusively on board. And thanks to the intervention of these 3 young men, George Lifshitz, Robert Mestriot, and Jean-Franck Lemont, 118 persons were definitely liberated from the 20th transport. The attack by these 3 young men is quite unique. Why is this so unique? Why did the railroad tracks leading to Auschwitz and other concentration and extermination camps not be bombed? Why did bystanders look away? The Holocaust, ladies and gentlemen, did not happen in a vacuum. The Holocaust was made possible by centuries of anti-Semitism, exclusions, expulsions, and pogroms, and especially by good people looking away in the face of evil. We are now well aware of the mechanism that leads to mass atrocities and genocide. We know that it starts with intolerance leading to discrimination of the other, before dehumanization and polarization set in. But luckily, we also know that the infernal process can be stopped, especially at its beginning. Today, we observe a worldwide increase of intolerance, racism, and anti-Semitism. And this forum is therefore more than timely, and I thank and congratulate the Swedish government who in these challenging times is hosting this event. Belgium is currently presiding the International Committee of the Arlesson Archives. The IRA recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust have been translated in our 3 national languages, and we are presently having an exhibition at the Caserne d'Orsay Museum, Fake Images, on stereotypes fueling anti-Semitism. And when she was Prime Minister, Sophie Wilmès started the preparations for a national plan on fight against racism, including anti-Semitism on and offline. Thank you.
Ambassador de Boot, thank you very much. The pledges that we heard here today from the heads of delegation, the heads of state, will be followed up, obviously, during the Swedish presidency of the IRA, and that will be beginning next year. So we've heard several ideas on how to combat anti-Semitism, distortion and denial of the Holocaust as well, museums, education, memorial sites, the importance also to strengthen research in the field so that distortion and denial of Holocaust can be fought against more effectively. There's also a need for states to take responsibility of their own history, which is also something that we've heard over the course of many forums discussing Holocaust remembrance and also combating anti-Semitism, and the issues and key elements to be taken into account here in order to move forward in this very important battle. Now, just a few comments on what is coming next as we wrap up this first first breakout session, which it was my pleasure to moderate. The heads of delegation will be having lunch with the Prime Minister. You will be accompanied, I'm being told, by your liaison officers, and the rest will be assisted by the staff delegates. They will join the State Secretary Caroline Wallenstein for lunch. And you will be shown the way there. Don't ask me. I don't know where anything is, but I think you will be assisted in that effort. And after the lunch, the second breakout session will take place, and I look forward to seeing some of you there. Thank you very much.